One is to find the doctors who come to Bhopal.
Yes, in January and February.
Yes.
And other than that? People who are not doctors.
Pardon?
People who are not doctors yet.
Yes. One is spreading the word about Bhopal, because as you know, particularly the younger generation who were born after the disaster, if you could publish materials on particularly the current issues. And the next year is the 30th anniversary of the disaster. And one of the demands, main demand we're making is this disaster has to be stopped. And if you let me know, or I'll send it to people here, about what plans we have presented before the government and the corporation and the US government about how to stop the disaster before it enters the 4th decade. So the more you can spread the word, it's better, because like I was saying, the younger generation doesn't know, because it was much before they were born. That is one thing. The second is, as I was saying, that we run a clinic since 1996, and in that we have a policy of not accepting funds from corporations, corporate charities, large funding organizations and governments. This is run by small donations by about 15,000 people. So one way is to organize events that would be both awareness raising and funds raising for the clinic. That would be one great way to support, because we are all very tight money-wise. And thirdly is to put pressure on the governments through petitions, signature campaigns, so that because the one thing that has kept Bhopal sustained is the knowledge that Bhopalis are not alone, and that needs to be reinforced and strengthened and put pressure on the government so that it actually sees to it. There's a group of ministers on Bhopal that the central government has created. Unfortunately, the chairman is Mr. P. Chidambaram, about who we have got documents through RTI and found out that he was actually advocating that Dow Chemical should not be made liable, and that for Dow Chemical there should be an Enron-like solution. So there is a lot of reason to step up pressure on the government before the 30th anniversary of the disaster, and anything that he can do would be great. And lastly, you are welcome and to come to Bhopal, and because there's always a lot of work that is needed to be done, apart from the medical work that non-medicos can do. Come to Bhopal and do that, join in that work, or from a distance, if you would like to use if you are a student of statistics, we have a lot of work for statisticians. Yes, please.
If only you could give me a copy of your lecture today with all the information contained, I would spread it in a certain British circle.
Fantastic.
You could, yes.
Yes.
Send it to the organizers, the
yes.
well.
Yes.
They will give it to me.
Thank you.
Just a copy of it.
Thank you, sir.
Is it true that the then Chief Minister made an escape route for Anderson?
Pardon?
Is it true that the then Chief Minister made an escape route for the Anderson?
Yeah, very much. And it was not the Chief Minister, it was higher up, people in the center as well. I think the Prime Minister was also involved. And the pressure came from the US government. And this is one other interesting aspect. Like this time, I do not know whether you have received that information, but this time, the Madhya Pradesh elections were going on. So we took a position of encouraging people to vote for Nota, none of the above. And the reason we did that was, for every bad thing that the Congress government did, we find an equal thing that the BJP government has done. Like the Congress government helped Anderson escape, but when the BJP came to power, when Advani was the Home Minister, he tried to dilute the charges against Anderson so that he does not have to be extradited to India and he doesn't have to face trial. So, like Dow Chemicals liability issue, Congress's Abhishek Manu Singhvi has written an opinion which goes against the official opinion, which is that Dow is liable for carbide. Abhishek Manu Singhvi's legal opinion says Dow is not liable. So this is from the Congress. And you have Arun Jaitley giving the same opinion, who is a BJP leader. So that is what we find, that irrespective of who is in power, they're equally and as ferociously protecting the corporate interests than the people's.
So, what do you think about the nuclear program? So, there is some other issues like liabilities, and so lots of debates are going around. So, what do you think on that?
About what?
Nuclear liabilities.
Yeah, this is a nuclear liability. In fact, nuclear liability bill, the interesting part is that the caption, the cap, is the same amount what was given to in Bhopal. $470 million, that talks about a cap of $500 million. Whereas the damage that a nuclear disaster would cause would be at least 100 times more. So we of course are strongly opposed, and we do not believe that in today's situation it is possible to have a safe nuclear plant. Particularly in our country, where most of our nuclear plants actually serve as examples of how nuclear plants should not be built.
Thank you.
First of all, I want you to say something about the recent research you are carrying on against all the products which are carcinogenic or which involves chemical hazardous products.
Yes.
So say a few words about this.
Right.
And also I have another question. Actually, Bhopal gas disaster happened in 1984, and after that, at around 86 onwards, especially in 90s, India actually entered into the phase of new liberalization. So it's the new economic policy or new age of economic policy which entered. So can you sort of connect the effect of this big industrial disaster and the after neoliberalization, the policy and its effects?
Right. So first about this particular survey that we have carried out. See, we say, when we have been saying for so many years now, that we may not be, even if you are not living in Bhopal, even if you are not gassed by the Union Carbide's poisons, you are still a Bhopal victim. You are in the sense that you are still a victim of corporate crime. And the reason we say this is, if you look at UNEP's report, the United Nations Environment Program published a report last year. It's called the Global Chemicals Outlook Report. And that report says that industrial pollution is among the 5 leading causes of death. Now, as you know, there are about 60,000 chemicals that are manufactured and emitted and stored and used in the world. Out of that, on an average, about 6,000 are extremely toxic. And in our daily life, we encounter something like 5,000 chemicals. Vehicular pollution, domestic pollution, all of this. And the scariest part of it is only 1% of these chemicals have been studied for long-term toxicity, long-term effects. Only 6% have at all been studied. And the reason you cannot study these 60,000 chemicals is because you do not have that money. You will never have that money. So what is happening is corporations are producing newer and newer chemicals and just letting it out, and it doesn't necessarily have to come from a chimney. It could be emitted, it could go into the water, or something like dioxin, whose one molecule is, which is a group of chemicals that are, even one molecule could be toxic, and that's being produced in anywhere when you incinerate, say, PVC, or you have medical waste incinerators, and they're getting generated all over. So we are getting exposed to a whole array of chemicals, dangerous chemicals, and without knowing what effect they have, and without, particularly in this country, because there are some countries which do body burden studies. In this country, we don't even know how much of it is in our bodies. We just know, because like some studies by say the Bhava Atomic BRC people, which show that Indian males, the sperm count is going by 2% every year, which means that a male child born in 1990 would have 40% less sperm count than someone born in 1970. Which means at this rate, reproduction, and we can see that. We can see how many in vitro fertilization and artificial insemination clinics we have today. We see how much reproduction is becoming a serious issue now. So what we are saying is, you don't have to live next to a hazardous factory. The poisons are getting in through everyday products, and that is the survey we did. We went to about 200 families. We found out what were they using to wash themselves or wash their babies, and things they use to clean their bathrooms, things they use to drive away mosquitoes, and stuff like that. Everyday, daily use products. And we found that there were at least 44 cancer-causing chemicals in these daily use products that we use every day. So, and this is apart from the chemical contamination of milk, of ghee, of butter, of baby food, all of this. So what we are saying is, the battle for justice in Bhopal is a battle against corporate crime, of which all of us are victims. So when someone says, can Bhopal occur again, we point out two places in Gujarat, two places like in the industrial estates, quite possibly you will find them in West Bengal as well. There definitely are in places like Patancheru near Hyderabad, or Kaddalore near Chennai, Vapi, Ankleshwar, these industrial estates. There is actually an ongoing Bhopal disaster there. Just in sheer numbers, the number of people who are being exposed, the way the children are being affected, the way the birth defects are occurring, the way they have chronic health problems, cancers, all of this. So it's not like it is likely to happen. It is happening. And it is happening not in that spectacular, dramatic way, but it is happening slowly and silently all over our country. So what we are saying is that Bhopal just gives you an example of what needs to be done. And someone was talking about liability. What we are saying is all these acts has to be seen as crimes. When you say, when a person goes and mixes poison in a well, that's a crime. And we go against that person, whoever has put poison in the well. But we say nothing when this poison comes from a factory that percolates through the ground aquifer and goes into our well. We just say that that's pollution. The other one is crime. This is pollution. So we are saying the way to confront corporate crime is to look at it as crime. If a person is killed because of the commercial activities of a corporation, that's murder. If a woman's body is violated, that's rape by a corporation. So we are saying that corporate crime is possibly the most ubiquitous crime, most all-pervasive crime, and the most invisible. We do not look at it. And Bhopal is one instance that makes you open and see what else are they doing. What are they doing to our children? So when we did that study, we found that the corporation whose products are most favored, most people who gift, like a baby comes into this world and their neighbors and their friends and their family members, they rush with gifts. And most of these gifts are Johnson's & Johnson's shampoo, soap, and we found that all of these contain carcinogens. So what we are saying is that these corporations have to be taken to task for these crimes, and they have to be punished exemplary manner so that there is curbing of this corporate crime. We are basically from Bhopal, we are pointing out at a crime that's far more than all the crimes that we can think of in terms of their impact. Can you imagine if industrial pollution is among the 5 leading causes of death worldwide, then can you imagine the amount of crime that is going unnoticed, let alone unpunished? So that's one. The second is, as I was saying, because of this neoliberal entrance of neoliberal policies since particularly 1990-91, what we have today a situation in this country in which we are a far worse situation in terms of hazards on an ordinary person, on the health and lives of the ordinary person. There used to be a government department called the Directorate General of Technical Development that used to actually vet every technology coming into this country. They would screen whether the technology was okay, whether it could cause damage, and all of that. That Directorate General of Technical Development has been wound up. Today, the same report, and I would encourage all of you to have at least look at it cursorily, the report by the UNEP, which is not a extremely radical organization, United Nations Environment Program. This report says that in the OECD countries, there has been actually a drop in hazardous chemical production. And all these production facilities are actually migrating to two countries, China and India. And if you see, I don't remember the actual figures, it's phenomenal, it's huge, and it's growing. So what we have is migration of hazardous processes, hazardous technologies, hazardous products into this country unchecked. And on top of that, we have this creation of SEZs, and I do not know whether Nandigram was one, PCPIR, which is Petroleum, Chemicals and Petrochemicals Investment Region. Each of these regions will be about 250 square kilometers, which is the region of Nandigram. So you have, for 250 square kilometers, you have nothing but petroleum and petrochemicals industries. So you can imagine the consequences of that. And that is increasing again, and all the more reason why we have to fight and join the Bhopal struggle for justice today, because this affects all of us. And if we, even a modicum of success in Bhopal would mean a lot for people elsewhere in the country.
Anyone else have any questions or comments?
Oh, question.
So my question is at that time, whoever was the CM or the Prime Minister, so there must be some incentive or disincentive for them not to go forward for what they did. And later they fought for a case, they settled without the knowledge of the victims to 1/7 what they would have got from the US courts. So I was wondering that what kind of disincentives could they have? Is it possible that whoever was the ruler, whoever was in a position to make some differences, what was their responsibility, which they didn't meet their responsibilities? Was there any hidden threat for them, real threat, maybe political or I don't know, I'm saying because you have been in this field, do you think they could have got a real threat, maybe political career, or maybe their life, whatever?
Yeah. See, one thing, as you can imagine, there are no documents about this. We know that the judge who gave the order on settlement, he benefited personally. The judge was Justice R.S. Pathak, and it was not his turn, but he was made, right after he gave this judgment, he was made a member of the International Court of Justice, in which he got something like $1 million a year as his remuneration, as member of the International Court of Justice. So the judge got, and we know that Union Carbide was behind because it was Pakistan's Dorabji Patel whose turn it was to go to the ICJ, but instead of Dorab Patel, Pathak went there. And so we know that the judge benefited. We know we know that Union Carbide was very close and continues to be close to the US government because they have been producing war gases. They were for the military industrial complex. Union Carbide was part of the Manhattan Project, in which the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were manufactured. It was very much part of all of that. So there was definitely pressure coming from the US government on the Indian government. But as to whether the individual, which was Rajiv Gandhi, or his party got any money out of all of this, that we are not aware of. We had got some indication that Justice Pathak made a, what shall I call, a clandestine detour on his way back from US. He went to Zurich. And we have, again, unconfirmed reports. We have reports, but we have no evidence that Quattrochi was there in Zurich at the same time that Pathak went. But again, we could not, because we really looked for this information, this evidence really hard, because all we needed to prove to get the settlement to be unsettled in an American court of law was if we could show that some money has exchanged hands. So we tried, but the problem was the investigators that we found who could do the job, they were asking for too much money. They were asking for $10,000 just to start talking to us. So we could not hire them, and the information remains undiscovered. But yeah, you cannot imagine such a thing happening without these kind of incentives and disincentives. But that's the best I can offer. I don't really know.
So, if we don't have any further questions or comments, then let us thank the speaker again and conclude our discussion.